The internet is today the world's most important communication tool. The rise of the internet has truly changed human life in many ways. Today, almost everyone is dependent on the internet in one way or another. Unfortunately, most people nowadays think that the internet is controlled by multinational companies, which are uncontrolled and unregulated by governments, like Google or Facebook or YouTube, etc. Most people nowadays think that the internet is controlled by multinational companies, which are uncontrolled and unregulated by the governments, like Google or Facebook, etc.
In some cases, that is true. In some cases, like that of smaller and weaker nations, for example, the Balkans, whose GDP is smaller than that of these companies, then yeah, we can talk about how Google or Facebook are more powerful and have more control over the internet than they do. However, what is often forgotten is that the internet was originally designed for military purposes. What we today call the internet was originally called the ARPANET and was created and used for the first time ever by the Pentagon and the American Department of Defense to communicate without having to worry about the Soviet Union intercepting these messages. Think about it. Even the first used cell phones were first invented and used by the American military. Its purpose was to allow the American military to communicate safely and avoid Soviet espionage. In other words, these multinational companies did not invent the technology that they use, they adopted it. You see, it is in the 90s that the internet and the cell phone started to become a lot more mainstream. It is in this period that people started to become more and more addicted to technology, let's say. And this is partly because the American government allowed it to. With the fall of the Soviet Union, the Pentagon felt safe in letting companies turn the internet and the cell phone into products for the average person. These companies, these geniuses like Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or whatever, they did not invent this technology, but they did adapt it and made it consumable for the average person. So, what does all of this have to do with geopolitics? Well, here's the thing. Here's where social media comes into play. Tell me, where do you think all of this information, all of this data is stored? Your messages, Google searches, passwords, photos and links, and so much more. Where do you think all of this is being stored? Do you think that the internet just exists in the air around us? Well, all of this data is mostly stored in servers that are located in the United States of America. Google, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, WhatsApp, and so many other social media platforms were created by American companies, and their servers are in America, under the control of the American government. Yes, you heard me right. The American government has more control over these companies and Silicon Valley in general than you think. Today, the Pentagon is the greatest job provider in the world, and therefore it is also the most influential organization in the world. Now, here's where things get interesting. You see, America's greatest geopolitical rivals, like China and Russia, don't use the same social media apps that you do. You see, for example, Russia has its own version of Facebook called Contact, and it is used at least by 50% of the population. In China, however, Facebook is straight out banned, and China even has its own version of WhatsApp called WeChat. Why? Well, it's because all of this data, all of this information about Chinese citizens, their political movements, comments, organizations, and subreddits would all be stored in American servers, impossible for the Chinese government to access, let alone control or analyze. However, the American government would be able to access these servers and analyze all of this data, all of these comments, subreddits, and social media messages, and movements that show that what the Chinese people are thinking, what they want or plan for the future. This is espionage at its finest. Indeed, espionage was the reason why the internet was created in the first place. Needless to say, the idea that a foreign government can spy and understand your people better than you do is very scary, which is why Russia and China, America's greatest geopolitical rivals, have created their own versions of social media like Facebook, WhatsApp, etc., and are trying to censor and regulate other social medias like Twitter. This is also the reason why TikTok, a Chinese app, is so problematic for America, because TikTok is the exception to the rule. It's a Chinese app whose servers are located in China, and it has become insanely popular, especially in America and especially amongst young people.
More teenagers are on TikTok now than use Facebook. It counts millions and millions and millions of Americans as users. But it is owned by a Chinese company that includes Chinese Communist Party members in leadership, and it is required under Chinese law to share user data with Beijing. And TikTok has admitted that it has sent user data to China. And what kind of data is TikTok collecting as it runs on our phones? A heck of a lot more than you would think. Images, of course, that users post, but TikTok also collects information about the messages that you send, about the apps that you use, the other apps on your phone. It collects the sites that you visit. It collects your search history. It collects your keystrokes. It collects your location data. It stores all of this and maybe lots more. And we know that it's a national security risk. Since our last hearing on this subject, the Pentagon, the Department of State, the Department of Homeland Security, and the TSA have all banned their employees and service members from using TikTok on government devices. In fact, the Pentagon even went so far as to say that employees should have their children uninstall TikTok from their personal devices. That's pretty extraordinary. But actually, it's only prudent. And that's why today I'm announcing I will introduce legislation to ban the use of TikTok by all federal employees on all federal government devices.
This is a problem for the USA, because this means that China is now the one that can analyze the most private informations of the American people who use TikTok. This is the reason why the Pentagon decided to ban its high-ranking employees from downloading the app on their phones and encourage to not let their family members download it either, because it would allow China to spy on their private messages, photos, and passwords. As you can probably imagine, this is not something the Pentagon wants. So okay, espionage and communication. But what is the geopolitical power of the internet? Well, even though the internet started off as a simple communication tool, today it has become a major way for the United States of America to increase their control over the world. A way to spy on other nations and its people, understand the trajectory of these nations. Do its people hate the upper class? Are they willing to fight a war? Are they not willing to fight a war? Are they sympathetic towards America or Russia and their narratives? How do they feel about the war in Ukraine or Syria or Iraq, etc., etc.? Again, the idea that Washington might understand the Chinese or Russian people better than the Duma or the Communist Party is unacceptable for this government, because they see themselves as the rivals of the USA. But the internet is also a powerful propaganda tool. If the internet's data can help us understand the trajectory of a society and its people, then it can also help us manipulate their thoughts and feelings. Think about it. Thanks to the sheer reach of the internet, propaganda and media in general have never been more powerful, and whoever controls the internet can dictate the narrative of the current geopolitics. Things like, Russia is evil because Vladimir Putin is evil, it's all his fault, or Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destructions, or this guy totally committed suicide in his own cell. I mean, this one is not really geopolitics, but it's the narrative that the media is pushing, and that everyone has accepted at this point. Thanks to the internet, the American media giants truly control the narrative of modern geopolitics. Think about it, even when America does something stupid or anti-democratic like invading Afghanistan and Iraq and leaving these countries worse than they found them, the media reacts in a defensive way. But when Russia invades Ukraine, then they are suddenly ruled by a crazy dictator fascist warmonger, even though Russia is trying to do the same thing America did 20 years ago. I say try because Russia is failing spectacularly at that. Now, I'm not defending Russia's or China's actions here, by the way, but I just want to say that the American narrative always puts these nations as the bad guys, while portraying themselves and their actions as good or justified in some cases, even though they rarely are. Unfortunately, however, this narrative has been losing some of its credibility, as America's retreat from Afghanistan shows that their military interventions are not for the greater good, but for geopolitical gain. But this is a topic for another video. Anyway, the main point of this video was to let you know that the internet is not controlled by companies, but by governments. And no one has more control over it than the Pentagon, because they invented it in the first place, and therefore they get to analyze its data and algorithms. I mean, take the case of Edward Snowden as an example of this. In 2013, he showed us how far American espionage can truly go. The internet started out as a communication tool and a way to avoid Soviet espionage, but it has now become a powerful means of espionage and propaganda, and the Pentagon has a lot more control and power over the internet than you may think. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.